So what I'm thinking I'm gonna do is, if this is okay with everyone, is share with you 3 lessons or sort of hot tips, if you will, that I've learned through mistakes that I've made, things I've tried out over the last couple of years in increasing the inclusion and equity that is present in our organization. I'm gonna share each of those and then offer some opportunity for reflection and maybe some dialogue after each one, so that it's not just a full duration of me speaking, but really getting into your experience and expertise, because I'm a learner in this as well. I have not arrived at any particular place of enlightenment, and I have some lessons learned to offer because I've been trying and failing at being more awesome and less awful, right? As a white person, as a cisgender person, as, you know, like all the things that I have and bring into the world, trying to be more awesome in all of those things. So we're gonna give that a try. Can I get some nods? Yes, that's gonna be okay. Okay, and again, take care of your own needs. If you're bringing a low energy into the room, that's fine. I am going to probably try to urge some dialogue, but you can just give me a glare and I'll back off, okay? I also encourage you to take care of your physical needs as well. If you need to stand up, if you need to walk around, take care of your bio break needs, etc. So I'm not gonna take offense. If you like leave in a huff and slam the door, then maybe I will. But short of that, I welcome you to take care of yourself. So as Nate mentioned, we work both out of Converge. That's how he knows me. And the reason I am here, as I understand it, I'm gonna pick up my notes at this time, because I haven't practiced this totally, but the reason I'm here is that I lead a nonprofit that trains young people, youth and young adults, to train others in issues of inclusion, equity, how to have tough conversations, and how to transform conflict for long-term and authentic relationship building. So authenticity, your theme word, Jade, is right in line with where I'm at with it, and like, what does that actually mean? How do we actually practice it? Over the last 2 years that I've been in my position, we've shifted the organization from being majority white staff, majority white, actually all white board, and majority white clients being served. We've shifted that entirely. So that we now have a staff and a client base that represents the broader dynamics and identities present in Denver. This has been a process, and so what I'm gonna share with you today are experiences that I've had specifically as it relates to increasing the amount of racial and ethnic diversity and inclusion in our organization, okay? I recognize that we all bring lots of identities to the table, and those identities are important. I bring lots of identities. The white folks who were comprised my board when I started all have lots of identities, and those are valuable and important. And in a country that is rooted in systemic oppression of people of color, it feels really important and in fact critical to center race as an identity in our work, because without doing that, if we get really good at disability and making space for people with disabilities, if we get really good at making space for women, if we get really good at making space for formerly incarcerated people, but we don't get really good at making shared spaces and shared leadership for people of different racial identities, we're missing the boat. We're not going to chip away at that systemic inequity that exists out in the world in a really effective way. So that's why we do that, okay? And I am a white woman in this work and am not always the best spokesperson for what it means to dismantle racism. But it is my work because white folks are the ones that are benefiting from racism, right? I said I wasn't gonna use the words white supremacy, but I might, so just heads up, it might happen. Couple of other things, yeah, so I'm also gonna focus on the personal and interpersonal practices that we use at Building Bridges and that I use in my own life to lean into this. And I'm gonna do that because we don't have very much time, and because each of your organizations, businesses, structures, lives, what have you, have lots of different kinds of systems. So I just wanna acknowledge that there's personal and interpersonal tools, and there are structural changes you can make to increase the level of equity in your work. We're not gonna touch on those as much today. The other thing I want to name is that I shaped this workshop with the knowledge and understanding that this would be a majority white space. And so if that is not an identity that you hold, if you don't identify as a white person, some of this, I don't know, I don't actually know how it'll land because I am a white person. So if you identify as a person of color in this room, just naming that, I apologize if this is hard. I don't know what else to say about that, except that often what I have found and what I've heard from my staff who are people of color in the nonprofit sector especially is that they're really used to being the only person of color in a room. And that beginning to shift that dynamic creates different spaces for their voice, for their leadership, and for their expertise. And that is why we committed to increasing the representation in all aspects of our organization. So that's my disclaimers. Actually, I have one more. This might get uncomfortable. It might already be uncomfortable, and it might continue to be. What I found when I talk to folks about whiteness and about racism, it triggers a lot of emotions. You know, stuff gets stirred up. I have felt defensive. I have felt attacked. I have felt guilty and shame. I have felt excitement and like self-congratulatory pride about being an awesome white person, right? And all of those emotions are like not common for me as a person who lives in this body in this world. So it might get uncomfortable, and I encourage you to just hang in there with me. I also encourage you after this to provide feedback. If this doesn't cut it, if this didn't feel right, if it didn't feel relevant, I would like to hear that, because I would like to be able to do this kind of work and support others in making their businesses more inclusive. And so I want to do a better job. So if you've got feedback, please let me know. Okay, so goals for the afternoon. I believe that you each possess expertise and wisdom and learning, and I want to provide space to draw that out. So one goal would be to hear from you, not just from me. Another goal would be to support you through the lessons, through the sharing of lessons that I've learned, in applying those lessons to your context. So I realize me as a nonprofit leader, probably a pretty different context than the one that y'all operate in. It sounds like we've got maybe construction, maybe what? For the city, great. So we've got public sector representation, we've got some nonprofit folks, we've got people in marketing, we've got people in coaching, we've got people in consulting, probably a lot of consultants here. Yeah, that's good. So lots of different industries. And your bag may not be increasing racial representation. I think it should be. It's my bias. But if it's not, there are identities that you can be leaning into creating more of. Finding folks who don't look like you to work with, to serve, to sell your stuff to get advised by, et cetera. So I would encourage you to take these with a grain of salt. I would encourage you to try to get creative about how my experience might apply to your lives. Deal? Okay, and I think we're gonna come away with some actionable steps after this that you can take and run with, okay? Okay, so step one, commit to change, okay? All change starts with a commitment to do so. A lot of us are in sort of that pre-contemplation mode of like, I kind of think something might be able to look different in the way I'm doing things in my life, but I'm not really ready to take action on it. I encourage you to get to a place where you're ready to commit, to decide. And so in my experience of that was when I first started, in my first few months in this role, I was really kind of getting my feet under me, and we had some alumni who were giving back to the organization through a fellowship. And one of the pieces of feedback that they consistently offered was that because we didn't have a lot of folks of color represented in our alumni pool or on our board, it meant that those folks who identified as people of color felt like they were often in a position to teach, that they were getting less out of it than they were giving, okay? Because while race is not the only thing we talk about, we basically talk about anything that would make people uncomfortable. So pretty much any topic you can imagine, that's what we deal with. And so there's lots of things that come up, but any time that it would land in that race bucket, our handful of alumni of color reported back to me that they felt like they were giving more than they were getting. And that's unacceptable. That's not the impact that we want to have. So my kind of turning point around that commitment was I see that it's not just the right thing to do, but it's also the thing we need to do in order to increase the impact we're having through our work and in our community. So commitment doesn't seem that hard, right? What I would also say on commitment is that it is the right thing to do to increase the diversity of people around the table, whatever table that might be. But sometimes that's not enough to stay focused and stay committed. So the other thing that we thought about and we named was, what are the upsides for our business? Is there an increase in access to revenue? Is there an increase in access to impact? Those are kind of our two metrics, right? And by having a business case for inclusion, it helped us keep everybody at the table as we move forward in the changes that we were making. So what I'd ask for you to do is on the back of that circle paper, you've got some questions. And so I'd ask you to take, let's see, maybe 2 or 3 minutes. No, 2 minutes. We'll say 2 minutes. And I'd love commitment. And as I said to Nate, I'm not a miracle worker. I am just offering my insights, and that I think we're learning together. So that's actually a great segue into my hot tip number 2, which is notice the gaps. Observe, attend to the facts as they are presented. This has a sort of a related thing that I think is part of why I've been successful over the last 2 years is because I am in a decision-making position and because I run a small organization that basically almost burned to the ground, not literally, but metaphorically speaking, before I came on. So we were able to build it up and build in some different ways of working. So I think that is similar to a lot of y'all who are solopreneurs, entrepreneurs, or working in small teams where you've got a lot of autonomy and where you're in a place where every next person you add to the team or every next client you get, you can make a choice to broaden the representation. Whereas those of you who work for the city or for larger organizations or businesses, there is some challenge there. So what I'll say about noticing the gaps. When I came on, as I mentioned, I'm a white woman, so I came in, the other full-time staff person was also white. We had 3 board members, which is, for those of you who know nonprofits, not enough to get anything done, but all 3 of them were white. And I observed also that 2/3 of our most recently completed alumni identified as white as well. We had lots of identities represented in that. On just the board alone, those 3 people represented Jewish, Christian, gender fluid, young, old, owning class, working class, there was a robust diversity of experience, but not that element of representation racially, which felt really critical, and as I said, we had committed to. And so as I start observing those disparities, right, those mismatch between our shared values and what our organization looked like, noticing them and naming them, right, elevating them. Gosh, I'm just thinking about, I see something going on here. Or as we survey our staff, or as we survey our clients, here's what we're seeing about the demographics, and referring that up to decision makers or reflecting on that yourself. The other piece of this, though, because I think it can be kind of easy to look around and be like, hey, these are almost all white folks. Like, what's up with that? But to then take the next level and say, where am I showing up in this? And this was the part for me that was humbling and that I'm going to share with you because it's vulnerable and I feel kind of embarrassed about it, but I have tended to it and then able to move into step 3. So noticing. So on a personal level, what I found in my first, 6 months or so in my role was that I was seeking out advice from people who looked like me. I was seeking out articles and blogs, podcasts authored by folks who shared my identities. I was being supported by a peer group that mirrored me. And in fact, mirrored me not just in terms of my racial identity, but in terms of almost all my identities, right? I was reading a lot of work by white women, a lot of, some of my closest friends, sort of my accountability supporters are queer white women who are from the Midwest and are my same age. Just basically talking to myself, right? Which is great and powerful. It's important to have peers who share your identities. And I had to do the humbling work of noticing and acknowledging that I was missing out, that I was insulating myself unintentionally, without clear focus. I was insulating myself from perspectives that were different from my own, and perspectives that could offer me challenge, offer me new insight, and offer me an opportunity to grow my business / nonprofit. I'm gonna just use business to make it all right. So what I'd invite you to do here is some reflection. They're also on your sheet, but I'm going to read them out loud. So if you need to look at your calendar, please do. Who are the last 5 people you've had cultivation calls with, client meetings, prospecting, advice giving with? Just think about who they are. And write them down, or not. You don't have to do anything. You're adults. So give some thought. Last 5 people. And then once you've got that down, and this is again in your business context, although you're welcome to think about it personally as well. So in the business context, as you've been seeking out resources to grow your skill set, your toolkit in your role, whatever that might be, write down the last 5 things you've consumed. Podcasts, article, New York Times piece. What are those most recent 5 pieces of information you've gleaned? And then as you think of that list of 10 data points, do their identities reflect your own? And there's not judgment here, one way or the other. And some identities aren't visible, or you might not know. As long as you think about this collection of information about your recent connections to people, content, ideas, what practices led you to have those encounters? So whether it's lead generation, cold calling, networking conversations, I went to a workshop a couple of years ago that was said something like, whether you call it a practice or not, whatever you do every day is a practice because you're doing it every day, right? So oftentimes we're engaging in patterns of behavior that are practices, but we don't call it that because we just do it on autopilot. So one of the things that I was reflecting on was one of my practices that I realized for networking was talking to my friends about the issues I was having at work and asking for their advice. Who do you know? Can you help me out? Can you connect to me? It's an awesome way. That's why we have friends, right? It's why we have a network. That's why we have a community. That's why we're probably in this room, at least in part, right? And so that was one of my practices. And the reflection that I had was, if I want to expand the diversity of perspectives represented by my contacts, by who I'm meeting with, who I'm talking to, I'm gonna have to add in some new practices. I'm gonna have to think differently about how I approach those personal relationships. I'm gonna have to think differently about how I cultivate clients. And the last question in this section that I'd love for you to think about is, what feelings, if any, come up for you as you do this reflection? I'll offer, when I sort of got held accountable, this was not my aha moment. Someone offered me this insight of, Megan, when's the last time you read something by a person of color? Megan, when's the last time you talked to somebody who was politically conservative in a meaningful way? So as I'm doing this reflection, the feelings that were coming up for me were not great. I was like, fuck you. I'm fine, right? That was my knee-jerk reaction, was like, what are you even offering? Like, I'm great. I'm doing a good job. Back off. And then after I got through that was some shame. And then after that came some sort of maybe frantic, I gotta get this right, which is a pretty white lady thing. We like to get things right. We like to do it right. We like to check the box. And if we can't do it right, we don't do it at all. That's gross, real, exaggeration, but is true to me. So I had this sort of frantic feeling of oh my gosh, let me go through my phone and find the 5 people of color that I trust and and I was like, no, calm down. That is not, let's chill out. And so once I worked through some of those, and I offer these just to maybe normalize if that's something that you've ever come across in yourself as you do some of this reflection, and also maybe to make it okay to acknowledge this is hard and we all react kind of emotionally and in ways that are not always logical. Now I will say, I did this reflection as I was writing this about my last right now. And as I was doing it, I was like, yeah, I'm awesome, right? I'm doing great. Check, check, check. That is also a problematic emotion, right? Like, this is not a gold star to be won. This is not a race to, a trophy to gain. And it's certainly not a practice that you can do once and be done with. So I offer up this notice the gaps as a lesson and a practice to continue reflecting on. If what you want to see in your business is more of X, Y, or Z, think about why X, Y, or Z is not there right now. What are you engaging in that's taking up the space where X, Y, and Z could be? And explore some options to change it. The other kind of side of the coin on this notice it thing is ask Google for help, okay? This comes from one of our facilitators last summer. She's a young woman, identifies as African American. She just graduated from University of Northern Colorado, one of a handful of Black students on campus. And she shared with us in confidence, as part of the staff training, that she frequently got asked by other students, by professors, by staff people, gosh, what's it like to be the only Black person in the room? Can you tell me about that? Well-meaning question, well-intended, I'm sure. But her response to that question always, I'm gonna look at this, each time she had to weigh how honest should she be, she had to weigh how much should she share, and she had to consider whether she had the emotional bandwidth personally to handle whatever reaction that white person would have to whatever it is she decides to share. And her feedback to us was, this is emotional labor that I am doing for this white person's curiosity. And their curiosity is good and important, and that drive is valuable. But it puts her in a place, depending on the time of day, the relationship, the level of connection or stress she might be having, it puts her in a place where she may choose to do that labor, right? Like for me, in that context with our staff, we had a trust, and she decided that I want to share this personal experience so you all can better understand my lived experience. But for the most part, she's like, I don't want to go there when I'm just like walking on campus to a class. That's not my job. It's not what I want to do today. And so what she says, she sums up her feelings like this. She says, just Google it. Google exists for a reason. Just fucking Google it. She said, don't ask the one Black person you know what it's like to be in a networking space with all white people. Ask Google. Don't ask your one gay friend how it is to go to a non-gay bar. Don't do it. Or do it, but do it with the understanding that what you're actually asking is for that person to educate you on their lived experience, and they may or may not want to. And the reality is there are lots and lots of folks sharing their perspectives online through blogs, through articles, through podcasts, through videos that offer that they have opted into doing the emotional labor of sharing with us what it is like to be a person of an identity that is marginalized in a space and in a world that doesn't honor that. And to start there. So this last question on this section is, what lived experiences are you curious about in this moment? Whose way of being in the world has your interest piqued? Who do you want to know better and understand more about? And would you be willing to commit to Googling it? Just Google it and read what comes up. And what I mean by that is, I encourage you to ask, like, I'm thinking for those men in the room who maybe heard what Courtney shared and are like, well, I guess I work with all men. I don't really know what that's like. Like, I wonder if Courtney would tell me a little bit more about how she leads a team of almost all women in a male-dominated setting. She might be open to giving you that information. And I think based on what she shared, she probably is. And in this setting, we've sort of opened each other up to that. But it's also not her job, and I guarantee there is some woman or 10 out there who have written about what it is like to lead as a woman. And if you want to know, go read them first, get that perspective, immerse yourself in that, and then build the relationships with people to the point where there's enough trust to ask those personal experiences. Does that make sense? Our curiosity and our inclination to want to know other people is good and is lovely and is a beautiful thing to be cultivated and to be owned. And we have to recognize that it's not just about us satisfying our curiosity, that the receiving end of that may also have some cost, some unanticipated cost that we don't have to bear. So that sort of corollary of notice the gaps, try to fill them, try to meet them, educate yourself, educate your team, but also use the resources that exist. and acknowledged work where work is done. I know we're getting close, so I'm going to go onto our third and final lesson learned for me. That made it sound a little bit teachery, but so the last practice that I want to share is practice listening. And I use the word practice a lot because we're almost all pretty bad at listening. Like most of the time, even when we think we're not doing a bad job, we're mostly almost always not great. And so what I invite you into is some lessons that I've learned around listening to feedback as it's given and accepting responsibility. So the story I'll share is, this happened actually just, I don't know, maybe a month and a half ago. I've got these two amazing lead facilitators. They are both young women of color who are stepping into increased levels of leadership in the organization. Hooray, so excited. They have an amazing skill set. They have a ton of hustle, and they're really shaking things up for us. I trust them. I know that they do good work. Over the summer, during our summer intensive, which is like a residential setting, we had a little bit of some challenging staff dynamics that they were dealing with on the day that our director of programs was off. So I was like the person to support them in that. And so I go up there for the day, and the whole day I'm just like, look, I don't want to step on your toes. I'm just here to support. Just let me know how I can support you. And I'm observing the dynamics, seeing what's going on, and I formulate how I would handle it in my head. We go into our sort of check-in with the two lead facilitators before the all-staff meeting at the end of the night. And I say, look, I don't want to step on your toes, but here's what I think you should do. And I tell them exactly what I think they should do. And I say, I'm happy to step in if you'd like me to, sort of like in this really weird way, acting as if I'm doing them a favor maybe, or I don't know. In hindsight, it's embarrassing to admit. And Jenny, after I finished my little spiel, she says, Megan, I just have to say something. That didn't feel great. That felt like exactly the opposite of what you said you wanted to do. And it feels like you're taking away our power and inserting yourself in ways that don't feel in line with what you say that you want to do. And bless her for being in a position to feel like she was able to do that. And we don't always have team members that are going to give us that frank feedback. But what I will say is my immediate reaction to that was to mirror her, because I was like scrambling with my own emotional response. And so who here has used mirroring as a listening tool? So the way we practice it is very formulaic. Ashley, could we demo? Okay, yeah, sure, great. So, Ashley, I would like you to share with me what you had for breakfast.
I had 2 cups of coffee, and then an hour after that, a lox bagel with no capers.
So what I heard you saying, Ashley, is that you had 2 cups of coffee, and then about an hour later, you had a lox bagel with no capers?
Correct.
Did I get that right?
Yes.
Anything else that I missed?
No.
Anything else about how that felt for you, like in your day, to start out your day that way?
I don't usually eat breakfast, so that's a little odd.
Okay, so I based on what you have shared, I would imagine perhaps you felt a little full and maybe slightly uncomfortable since it wasn't your new normal routine. Is that right?
Yes.
Any other feelings that I missed?
Nope.
Great, thank you. Let's give it up for Ashley. Okay. So mirroring, you literally say what they said back to them. Then you check in. Is that right? Is there more? Say it again. Is that right? Is there more? Say it again. And then sum up what you heard and say, based on what you shared, I would imagine you might be feeling blah, 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 blah. And empathize with how you imagine they might be feeling. And then check in. Is that right? Is there more? Super formulaic, feels really goofy to do it. And I don't have time to make you all do it, but I swear to you, every time I've done it, every time I've had it done to me, I feel heard. The tension releases, the conversation slows down, and we're able to really see each other. So in that moment, I reflected back to Jenny, what I hear you saying is, I've done exactly the opposite of what I said I wanted to do, and I'm putting you in a position to feel like I'm stepping on your toes and taking over and doing things and recommending things that you were going to do anyway and acting as if it's my idea. Is that right? And she's like, yeah, that's right. And I said, I would imagine you might be feeling, I don't know, kind of nervous about checking your boss like that, a little anxious about how this is going to go, Probably a little frustrated. Is that right? Yes. Is there more? No, you got it. And it allowed me to hear her. And it allowed me the time I needed to not buck it up, right? Because I could have been like, no, that's not what I meant. Because of course it's not what I meant to mean, but it is what I meant. And I didn't mean for the impact. I didn't mean to hurt her. I didn't want her to feel not trusted, but it happened. And so giving myself that time, that mirroring time, slowed me down so that I could formulate a more effective, emotional and real, authentic response. So I invite you into that practice as well. Listening where you'd rather talk, and really hearing the feedback where you'd rather challenge or push back. It's not easy, and it's not a one and done kind of thing. So as we close, I invite you to consider these last few questions. Reflect on the last time you received feedback from somebody you cared about, either in the work setting or in a personal relationship. And what did that take for them? And also, what was it like for you to receive it? And I guess lastly, what would it be like to offer constructive, loving, empathic feedback to the people in your circle more regularly, if you're not already doing it? Okay. That's all the content I have. I realized I didn't actually facilitate dialogue in the way I thought I was gonna. So if in our last 3 minutes, any thoughts? Yeah.
Since I work for the city, I will just say that my staff is all white. I used to have a woman of color, and she retired, and she made it very apparent to me that we were very white-centric, and I took that to heart, and I've been trying to change, especially how we work for the recycling department, so all of our material, all the pictures were always white people, and so we've changed that. We now have a Spanish website. We're working on it. But for me, I've hired probably about 3 or 4 different people in the last 2.5 years I've been there. They're all white. How do I get, because the way that I look at applications, I don't look at your name, I don't look at any identifying, I look at your experience and then I rate you, and whoever's at the top is who I'm gonna give interviews to. I want more people of color. I want diversity. Everybody's cis. We don't have anyone who's disabled. How do I get people to apply for these programs so that I can then get them on my staff in a way that, one, is legal, because it has to be legal. I don't know how, because I love hearing that you were able to get a board and hire people. I just don't.
I love that question. And I will say it's not for lack of talent out there, right? I mean, our city's 33% Latino, 15, maybe 12% African American. I mean, there are people here, right? They're not getting to you. And so my short answer to that would be let's have a longer conversation, because it's definitely structural. I think in terms of where the jobs are being posted, how the application process is structured, how things get funneled through. And I worked for the city for a little while as well, so kind of knowing a little bit about their OHR and sort of how that works, it's definitely systemic. And the way that systemic oppression plays out is through systems, right? And it hides in plain sight. And it definitely hides in color blindness, right?
Well, and they've also, because we have operations, and our operations staff is pretty much all Latino male. And so then when they combine ops staff with program staff, they say, oh, we're diverse. And you go, but we're not, because all of our customer service staff is all Latino women.
Yeah.
So, and now we have one Asian man who's now supervising that team, and then my all-white team. And so you kind of go, there may be diversity, but it's pockets, and no one's intermixing. It's really...
It's siloed.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I also have some thoughts about, I mean, you're playing the long game in terms of the Spanish language access, photographs, marketing materials that are inclusive, things of that nature, making it so that it is a desirable place to work for a person of color. And then there are things that you can probably do in terms of your internal management around, like one thing that I've seen at the city is that even in departments that are predominantly people of color, white supremacist ways of doing business get replicated. You know, quantity over quality, individualization, that idea of getting it right, and if it's not right and perfect, it's all wrong. Primacy of the written word. There's things about whiteness that are markers of the identity of whiteness, and they get held up as the best, even though they're just one way of being. So there's probably some of that at play as well. But yeah, my short answer is it's definitely structural, and you have, like, the way we did it is because we're small, we were able to get way out ahead in how we wrote our job description, to whom we marketed the job description, and how we prioritized, how we asked for skill sets and what experiences people bring to the table to solicit folks who had a diverse lived experience.
Can you explain a couple of those differences, like especially when you're talking about changing how you wrote the job description?
Yeah.
Stuff. Can you get a little more?
Sure, I can. So there's, again, Google, I love it. It's the best. There are resources out there around equitable hiring practices, and shifting from just making it like equal to actually making it equitable. Which, have you seen the image where you've got the fence and the kids trying to watch, and everybody sends in the same box and only two? Is this ringing any bells? I can send it out. So this idea of equity is not that everybody gets the same thing, but everybody gets what they need for their needs to be met. And so we relied on that. We shifted our language in the application itself. We brought all of our marketing and even our job descriptions we've gotten them down to 10th grade reading level. We're trying to get down to 8th. Best practice is 6th, I think. 6th grade. I'm looking at the marketing people. And so that's one step. And it's not about dumbing down. I don't want you to hear that out of me. What I want you to hear is making it approachable and accessible. We also, some of the things that we've done is focus on highlighting the benefits in ways that appeal to the demographic we're looking for. So we really wanted to have some moms in the mix. And so for our summer, highlighting, one of the benefits is you can have your kid at camp. One of the benefits is, flexible training schedule, or, whatever that might be. I know that my wife's the one that I learned most of this from, to be honest. But she wanted to hire an HR director who was older and seasoned, and sort of looking for a sort of sunset career of 5 to 10 years. And so what she did is in the benefits package, put front and center 8% investment in your retirement. Great fit for seasoned professional. Used words to describe the person she wanted, and highlighted the benefits that would draw in a person whose needs she wanted to meet. Does that make sense? Yeah. And then from the marketing side is just, you get creative, about, there's Latino Leadership Institute is one of my favorite places to market opportunities. Lots of other places where you can get beyond your network. Maybe one more question or comment? Great.
Thank you, Megan.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you all. Appreciate it.